I think the biggest piece about working with the Clintons and other dignitaries or political figures is just ensuring that you understand what their requirements are.
Welcome to the Convene podcast. I'm your host, Magdalina Atanassova, Digital Media Editor of Convene. It's a pleasure to bring you another episode from Season 3 as we offer an exclusive behind-the-scenes glimpse into Convening Leaders 2024. In this episode, I speak with Xernona Martin, who among her many responsibilities managed the security operations on site, a task of heightened importance as we hosted the Clintons as our keynote speakers. She unveils insights on preparing for high-profile guests, ensuring both their safety and a seamless experience for all attendees. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Xernona, and welcome to the Convene podcast. It's a pleasure to have you a part of Season 3, dedicated to convening leaders and Pcma in general. Can you briefly introduce yourself to our listeners and share a bit more about your background as well as your role at Pcma?
Absolutely. Thank you, Magdalena, for having me. So I am the Vice President of Events and Experiences with Pcma. I've actually been here for a little less than a year, but it has been complete joy. As far as my background is concerned, I've been in events and experiences for about 17 years, mostly on the corporate side, covering everything you can possibly imagine. I think the only thing that I have not planned in my career is a music festival, which I actually look forward to. But as far as my role at Pcma, I'm responsible for leading the team that is responsible for planning our flagship events such as Convening Leaders, EduCon, and some of our other events as well this year that are mainly focused on our event organizers.
When it comes to convening leaders, what were or a bit about your responsibilities there?
Absolutely. Convening leaders, my main responsibilities were helping to produce the main stage. So working on everything from the creative aspect to the programming to working with our keynote speakers as well, especially with the Clintons. And then I also had a separate responsibility for building out the experience for the district, which is our marketplace.
One of the highlights at Convening Leaders was the main stage that you mentioned with the Clintons. But that required a lot of tightened security while we were on site. So can you walk us through the process of working with local law enforcement, Clinton security detail, and other entities prior to convening leaders?
I think the biggest piece about working with the Clintons and other dignitaries or political figures is just ensuring that you understand what their requirements are. So from the very beginning, when we were notified that the Clintons did accept our offer, we decided to make sure that we understood from their perspective what their requirements were. If that came along in their contracts and writers, and being incredibly thorough, reading line by line, ensuring that we captured everything that we needed to execute on our behalf. As far as working with their security detail, and again, you will find this along with some political figures, especially former presidents and so forth, I would say there's about 3 or 4 layers, right? So you have your advanced team. They're not necessarily security, but the advanced team does help you prepare for their arrival, allowing you to understand exactly what's needed, what the requirements are, and so forth. Then you have Secret Service, which will also work with them. That's their detailed security, ensuring that everything is safe and secure, not only inside the venue, but outside the venue. Secret Service is also responsible for transporting them from one place to another and ensuring that they arrive on time as well. Then you have your local security, right? So you have your local police departments that you want to engage to not only allow them to know that you have a former president and secretary of the United States coming in, but also to ensure that they are aware so that they can help clear any paths if it's with city traffic or just providing additional support to Secret Service. And I would say the last piece, of course, is implementing private security on site if that is necessary. So working very closely with your venue head of security and ensuring that they have everything they need. So those are the 4 layers that essentially we went through, right? Just making sure we understood those requirements and working through each area or each contact to make sure that we have what we needed.
Was quite a handful. And that's why you had day one at Convening Leaders used as a test of the flow of people into the main stage and entering with all these added security measures because there were more than 4,000 people on site. So can you explain for those that were not in attendance what that kind of looked like And what did you learn on that day, and what changes did you make for the following day when the Clintons were on site?
Of course, behind the scenes, we're working with their security teams to ensure that we have everything from their green rooms ready to everything for, from stage furniture to the staff that we have on site, ensuring that they have what they need backstage, right? But front of the house was interesting because we wanted to be sure that we were implementing something new for convening leaders, which was our additional just like bag and security check. So just to be sure that we prioritize the safety of our participants as well. As the Clintons, we did hire a private security company that then came in, brought out back check. We made sure that we essentially set up stanchions and so forth to support those 4,000 people coming in, flowing in, and so forth through the back check. And we also had some of those mag readers, right? And those are essentially what people would assume as metal detectors. So just making sure that happens. I think what else, some things that we learned along the way that were incredibly helpful is that we did a test run the day before. We knew that we had a group of folks. We knew our participants. We knew we had a very large group that was not used to entering in that way or entering through essentially stanchions. They just kind of walked through the door. They grabbed some coffee, walked through the door 15 minutes prior. So a few things we did to prepare was that we wanted to be sure that we communicated very effectively through our event app, through any sort of signage, any sort of pre-event communications, that doors would open essentially an hour and a half beforehand. We worked with a private security detail to get that timing down, right? To understand how soon we needed to open the doors, to make sure that we had a start time at 9 a.m. The last thing you want to do is start late when you have a political figure or dignitary coming in that has dedicated their time to do that. But it was interesting on our test run Monday. Sorry if I'm skipping around a bit. On our test run Monday, we realized that our badge scanning just would not work with trying to get 4,000 people through the door in an hour and a half, believe it or not. And really the bulk of those folks happening, coming in towards the last like 20 or 30 minutes. So we decided on that Monday to pull those badge scanners and to make sure we still maintain the flow of traffic, of pedestrian traffic throughout with the stanchions, with the back check and so forth. We made sure that all the security, we added a little bit of extra staff. We worked with our internal staff to ensure that they were helping to greet people, to make it a positive experience so that people understood the flow. We also implemented a separate entrance for our participants that had special accommodations. So if they're coming in with a wheelchair or had, needs around hearing impairment or whatever that looked like, we wanted to be sure we prioritized them. And as people walked in, we had certain areas of the floor color coded. So they could follow a red if they were special accommodations. They would follow green if they had reserved seating. They would follow blue if it was general seating. So there was actually a lot of planning that went into it to help us create a positive experience, but also a very clear flow to get all of those people through the door within the last like 30 or 45 minutes. So those are the things that we implemented on the front of house. Back of house, like I said, we were just working with their Secret Service. We essentially did what they requested. We made sure we had what we needed. We had some additional private security in the back as well, of the house as well. But that was our main coordination, was just making sure, again, the focus was not only on the Clintons, but the focus was on making sure our participants had a very positive experience during that time.
Were you personally happy with how it turned out?
I was proud of us. Monday, it was interesting. Monday we saw the flow. We saw that the badge scanners weren't working, but I was proud of us for being incredibly flexible, for doing what we needed to do, for prioritizing our participant experience and as well as the Clintons, and coming together just as the PCMA team to be able to welcome and guide people into where they needed to be. So I think from that perspective, from a theory, right, that you feel like the work to true implementation, we did a pretty good job with that as well. We also implemented around, back checks that a certain size limit were only allowed within that space, which I think does reduce the time that people have to do back checks and the time that people have to go through the metal detectors. So for the most part, yes, to implement something new for 4,000 people that has not been done in previous years, especially when you have guests that have been coming for like 10 years over, right? I think we did a pretty good job.
I agree with you. I saw it in person, so I totally agree with you. It was quite the experience. And you already mentioned all the communications that you did prior in all sorts of ways possible to warn people about the security measures. And I'm sure a lot of people were aware especially those coming from North America and even some of us. But would you change something, or do you think the communications could be improved next time around?
I think for the communications part, we did a pretty good job. Another piece that I would have liked us to do is just do a little bit more of added staff for our bag check. So we were requiring people, of course, to either check their bags or bring a smaller bag. And so I think we did not expect the amount of people to check their bags as they did. So I think that's the piece. That's the piece that sticks out to me, so that we prepare better next time. But for the most part, I think things essentially from a communication standpoint went pretty well. I think they went so well that everybody decided to check their bags because we were recommending bag check, right? I think it went so well that people actually listened and decided to check their bags. And then we realized that, it worked, but we weren't as prepared for the amount of people that were coming. But definitely everyone was patient and so great and understood that we were very thankful for that. But I do think that those communications pre-event, during the event, pushed through the app, the signage and everything that we did helped with just setting, expectations for our participants.
And what about staff? What measures did you implement for the staff at PCMA and also partners that they had to comply with?
So for PCMA, it was all hands on deck. So the PCMA staff, I think we had about 56 people come in. And when I say everybody participated, from our C-level executives, onto some of our associates and coordinators, they were absolutely fantastic, even our volunteers. So we wanted it to be all hands on deck for two reasons. One, we wanted to be sure that we had our plan very organized and enough staff to accommodate through, like we said, the color-coded seating, through the lights. We had enough ushers. We had enough people outside that were helping and assisting our private security with just the flow of people. So we wanted to be sure we were well staffed in that area, but we also wanted to show how PCMA is one team. So it was important for us to also show our excitement about the Clintons coming, our excitement with our C-level executives, standing at the front door and greeting people as they came through the front door of the main stage and so forth. So I think that was very important as well. And I think it went over well. I mean, our team showed up, they showed out, everybody did what they were supposed to do. Even when back check came in, we had some of our team members jump in to help and assist with our back check right away. So I think it really, from our staff, from our internal staff, I'm very proud of us, and just it was a great experience, especially as just a new executive here for less than a year, right? To see that happen.
But also, not all staff was allowed backstage, especially
Right.
during day two.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the added measures. So how did you coordinate that? Or which people did you allow backstage, and what were the procedures they had to go through?
So backstage, of course, we wanted to be sure that we were being very cognizant and mindful of the requirements from the security teams, from both, their advanced teams to Secret Service and so forth, for those recommendations. So part of it is absolutely limiting people that have access backstage. I'll talk about staff first, and I'll just talk about like the overall program, which is interesting. So for staff, we just made it very critical and articulated it very clear that whoever needed to be there were the only people that could be there, right? So we implemented special badges that were color-coded as well, that allowed them that access to backstage during that day. Not only was it just our internal staff, but it was also our convention center staff. So if we had, the catering staff coming to refresh food and beverage, if we had maintenance staff coming to clean, if we had our production staff as well, right? Our production staff was really large. So we wanted to be sure that everyone backstage went through that same process. They actually entered through backstage. They went through a wand process just to make sure the metal detectors, we made sure that they had those color-coded badges, and that we made sure that everyone who had those color-coded badges and had access were absolutely necessary to the program that day, so that we didn't have kind of different people wandering in and out, right? So that helped us to prioritize the safety of both our participants and the Clintons. In addition to that, I will say that we also, created a list. We did have a meet and greet of the Clintons at the very end of the event. That list was very, color coded, had to go through security and those measurements as well. What was also interesting that we had to balance was that we had acts on stage prior to the Clintons coming. So we wanted to be sure that those acts got on stage. They were able to, make their introductions, go through the videos, kind of go through their speaking as well. And then as soon as they exited, we did have to escort them from backstage right into the general session. Again, So it was interesting to balance all of those things and making sure that you had a very strict list, additional security behind stage. Everybody understood what they were supposed to do. And again, those communications come in, right? You want to communicate to your internal staff, the convention center, and also our participants that were part of the meet and greet about we would come get them from main stage seating, right? And escort them backstage. And they had to line up to take photos. And this is where like everything essentially would happen. So that's essentially how it works. I will say this part. I didn't say these two things that I think were very interesting tidbits this time was that we had to build a specific green room in the back because we were using an exhibit hall and we built everything from the ground up. So typically you may, reserve a room or theater style space that has a green room already built in. That did not happen. So we had to build a separate green room for Clintons, and we also had to build a separate VIP meet and greet space for them as well. So if you even looked backstage, you would see this huge production staff, but you would see these kind of private spaces that were built from the ground up too.
That's very interesting. And I have a question. There was this random conversation of why were the Clintons having a handheld mics and not what I would call a Madonna mic?
Yeah, it's completely based on their preference. So that's what they preferred, and that's what we accommodate. Mm-hmm.
Because there was a suspicion that it's a security ask, so that you would not touch, essentially, because you have to put the mic and the wire of the mic. So that was the suspicion. Was that a security thing or a preference thing?
Yeah, it was a preference. So I will say this, right? That the handheld mics were in their rider. That's the preference that their events team told us that they wanted. If it's a security thing we are unaware of, we don't know that, right? We just think it was a preference that they had handheld mics, to be honest. I worked with other political figures and dignitaries that had some of the same security requirements, and they had lavaliers. So I think it's just a preference.
Fair enough. It was worth the ask.
Yeah.
So I hope that the people I had the conversation with are listening and would get their answer now.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah.
Prior to this recording, we were talking with you that this is not the first time you're working with the Clintons, correct? And were the security measures different this time around from what you had experienced before?
Yes, I had through a previous role worked with the Clintons before. Neither one were actually in office during that time. So it was sort of similar, but I would say that it was closer to when Secretary Clinton had just left her role with the White House. The only difference I would say that happened, and it could again be just the timing of it all, was that I would say our Secret Service at that point, we wanted to be sure it brought in dogs and things like that the day prior. So that actually did not happen for this Convening Leaders, even though we expected it. So they did bring in the K9 unit just to make sure, the space to sort the space for any kind of dangers or threats and things like that. So we did have to open the doors for the Secret Service just a little bit earlier, and our local police and things like that, to do like a full sweep of the room prior to allowing anyone in.
That's interesting. So what were your personal learnings from this whole experience? And you can expand, beyond the security part.
Absolutely.
Because Convening Leaders was huge.
Yeah. I would think from just preparing for the Clintons and safety and security measures around that, the biggest piece is being prepared and being flexible. So we were actually able to contract them a few months out of Convening Leaders. We, of course, had put in a request early, and then we were told a little bit later. So I would always recommend two things if you are considering having someone, guests of their caliber, essentially join your main stage or as a keynote. The first thing is just be prepared to be flexible in understanding, be ready to read the contracts, their writers, and all of their requirements, and being flexible in what you need to do around for your program to accommodate those. So that's one piece, because those details that are listed in the contract and the writers are so incredibly important, and the flow of the day, how things will work, how you set your stage, what requirements are there. That's going to be one of the major leads for just the overall participant experience and how to prepare for them. I would say the second piece is budget. So make sure that you're budgeting additional dollars to provide that private security if you have to build out any additional, spaces and things like that to accommodate, your your dignitary or political figure. So I would say those are the two biggest things. And I would say the third thing is this, that participant experience, understanding that you are going to have an overwhelming response, more than likely to that portion of your program. You absolutely have to have it down and say, what would I like to see? What clarity do I need as a participant to be able to make this the best experience for me as possible? So understanding from that participant experience, even if I'm a fan and I arrive 30 minutes early before the doors open, what does that look like? Am I being greeted by a smiling face? Am I being greeted by pastries and coffee and those kinds of things that will keep me, happy and excited and thrilled to go see that? And then when I walk through these lines, is it clear what I'm supposed to do? Have I been communicated? Am I aware of all of the requirements that I need to be? Do I know where the restrooms are? Do I have access to those things? So I think those top three things of just reading and understanding the contracts, the writers, and the requirements, really working closely with your budget and just creating those buffers to be able to accommodate those requirements as well. And then walking through and prioritizing that participant experience and their safety is going to be, those are the major learnings I would think that come from, this experience and that will help make it successful.
Anything you would do differently if you had the chance?
I think the biggest thing is just the back check, right? We communicated and we did that great. I just wanted to be sure we had, realistically, I'm still a planner at heart, right? We would add more people to the back check, even though, like I said, our internal staff completely jumped right in and even got compliments for doing that from our very gracious participants. So I think that's the biggest piece. I would have budgeted more. I didn't, right? I didn't expect, even though I had worked with them, I didn't expect to have to build things from the ground up that kind of hit our budget there. So that's the piece that I would have just created a bit more of a buffer for us to accommodate. Everything went absolutely fantastic, but it's just one of those things that I pride myself on, and being able to have a buffer. I would have created a little bit of a larger buffer just to make sure that we could accommodate and provide, so we didn't have to eat it on the back end, I guess you could say. So, yeah.
I get it. And that's, I think, you're being an event planner and a perfectionist.
Yes, exactly. You're right.
Was there anything we didn't address and we should mention before we wrap up?
I think that for those who are planning to prepare to have guests similar to the Clintons, or guests that are incredibly well known and, of that caliber, I would say the more knowledgeable you are about their needs, the more prepared you'll be. And the more you understand that they're also human beings, the more you'll be prepared, right? Just making sure that you understand their experience as well as balancing that from the participant is going to provide you great success at your event.
Thank you so much for this conversation and sharing a bit more about how this huge piece of Convening Leaders went. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Remember to subscribe to the Convene podcast on your favorite listening platform to stay updated with our latest episodes. For further industry insights, head over to pcma.org/convene. Until next time.